Welcome back to Breaking the Cycle of Gang Violence podcast. This is episode 7. We'll turn things right over to Joe to introduce us to our guest today.
All right, today we have Ahmed Baameur. Ahmed Baameur with the Kern County Probation Department has been there for approximately 19 years. His experience includes investigating and arresting juveniles and adults who have engaged in possession, use, trafficking, and sales of narcotics and other dangerous drugs, as well as firearm-related offenses, while these people are actively participating in criminal street gangs. Currently, he's assigned as a supervisor of the high-risk offender unit. Mr. Baameur.
Good afternoon. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. I want to dive right in. Can you tell me what a normal day in the life of you is doing your job?
That's the beauty of it. There is no normal day, and I've been, looking for a better paying job for the last 19 years, but I'm having too much fun, and there's too much interesting stuff going on as a probation officer. So I'm not plugging that for my department. I'm just saying that some days you can come in and be inundated with personnel stuff, paperwork. Other days you are doing investigations like Joe just talking about, involving criminal street gang members, firearms, serving warrants, preparing papers for the court. So there is no average day, but usually, like any other branch of law enforcement, some of your job is reactionary. So we see the same news clips, we hear about the same shootings, we hear about the violence in the community, and so sometimes when you come in, you're going to be a part of that as far as holding people accountable, and then also linking folks with services. So It's all over the place.
Yeah, it definitely is. So when you're talking about specifically cases that have to do with gang violence or offenders that are related to gangs, what's challenging about working with those individuals?
I think one of the biggest hurdles, and I think other folks in law enforcement will agree, is kind of the code of silence, or the inability of people, or not inability, but fear and intimidation that's involved when it comes particularly to gang violence within our community. That and kind of a overall acceptance. I don't know how many times you've heard the phrase "keep a gangster." That's gangster. I don't know if that's cool. It's like using the word pimp. That's something that we've kind of accepted as a group and a community. I can't speak for everyone, but I think that you get kind of desensitized to it, and that can be a hurdle too. That's something that kids look up to, as opposed to looking up to being someone in the military, law enforcement officer. So,
for those who aren't familiar with probation, what does probation do? What is the role?
Great question. I don't think a lot of people know what we do in the community. From being responsible for juveniles that are on probation, that are incarcerated. We have Camp Irwin Owen, Kern Crossroads facility, and Juvenile Hall. We're responsible, like the Sheriff's Department is, for inmates at Lerdo, at CRF. We're responsible for juvenile inmates, and all the way from Juvenile Hall up to our treatment programs. That's one end of what we do. We also supervise juveniles who have been arrested by law enforcement, go to court, and get assigned probation. Basically, you're going to be waive your Fourth Amendment rights of search and seizure. You're going to participate in treatment programs, go to school when you're supposed to, abide by all of the laws and curfew, et cetera, on the juvenile side. And then on the adult side, kind of the same thing. It's after the hook and book process. We're responsible for linking folks with services while at the same time holding them accountable for their actions. And we have a whole branch or whole arm that does recommendations to the court and does that court side of the law enforcement spectrum. So if I'm forgetting something, I apologize.
I'm sure there's probably a lot more,
yes.
Right? But in general, that's a good way to kind of encapsulate it. Can we talk a little bit about specifically with the juveniles? Because throughout the series of the podcast, we've talked about a lot of people have had the opinion of attacking the problem young, when they're young, right? To prevent it from happening and focusing on that. So when you're in touch with some of those juveniles who are on probation, what is the mindset and how do you see that evolve maybe the more times you see them or throughout the years?
Yeah. No, I think there's definitely something to be said for early intervention. And that starts before a kid is, even old enough to be able to identify with anybody other than their parents. And I definitely, when I say this, I'm not saying that the root cause of gangs is the parents. I'm just saying that parenting and skill building when it comes to parenting is one of the most effective tools, looking from my seat. And evidence-based research also shows that if you can start before we get to these risk factors, at ages 9 through 12, and really focus on giving parents resources and skills to help with that parenting, all the challenges. Everybody knows how difficult it is to be a parent. Imagine doing that when you're growing up somewhere where you don't have the protective factors that we do. So I think that the sooner that those skills are kind of relayed and practiced, the higher the chance is that you're not going to find yourself in a situation where your kid is a victim or a participant in gang violence. Bad things happen to good people all the time. But if we're looking at statistics, if we're looking at kind of embossing our protective factors, I think that's definitely something that would make an impact.
Mm-hmm. How do you see some of those young kids? Because you said 9 through 12. That seems very young in my mind, but obviously I'm not disconnected. I know that things are starting at a young age. What is it like seeing kids at that age? What's their demeanor? How do they act?
I don't know. I mean, Joe can talk to this too. I don't know if you remember some of the right here in Delano, younger brothers of other dudes. So when the emulation, dad's not in the home, emulation is now of the older brother. And so regardless of whether you're 8 years old or 12 years old, you're looking at what your role model's doing. And if that role model is, participating in a criminal street gang or is putting in work, then that's something that you're going to emulate even at that age. And it might not look the same. It might not be as dangerous in our eyes, but walking the walk, talking the talk, identifying, that starts and it begins that mindset that can lead to engaging those activities before they even know what they're doing.
And in a sense, you kind of see it encouraged from the older sibling. Little brother's acting like me. I was like, oh, that's cool. It's so funny. Come on, let's go hang out over here. Let's go for a ride. And then they're doing whatever they're doing. So yeah, you do see that. And you see the moment, I guess, when the older sibling is proud of his little brother who's acting like him.
Yeah. And I mean, if you ask somebody, there's a lot of dudes that I ask, hey, do you want your younger brother to turn out like you are? Oh, heck no. No, sir. There's not a chance. But what are you doing? Words are words. But if you, don't be about it. You can't, if you're talking about it, or be about it. And if you set an example through action, then someone's going to follow that. Regardless of what I say, it's what I do. So, maybe they have the best intentions at heart, but if you walk the walk, that little duck's going to follow.
Do you see it with some of the younger kids that you're interacting with where they're almost shocked that they're in the position that they're in? Do they not even realize that they've gotten to a point where now they have consequences for what they're doing?
Kind of like what we were talking about before the show, just like the parent that's in that situation where they just realize, oh my God, what happened? It's usually at that point, in that moment where it's a little bit too late. Hopefully it happens earlier. So you get kicked out of school for bringing a knife to school, and there's some kind of gang impetus involved. There's some kind of connection. The school resource officer passes it on to the intake probation officer that's doing the report, and then we can kind of link services, or the community as a whole can. But unfortunately, sometimes it ends up where you got a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old that has done something or been a victim of something atrocious that they go, damn, this is what this means or what it feels like. Even though you've seen it, living it is something totally different.
Mm-hmm. So what is the evolution that you see through younger adults or teens or kids, really, as far as like maybe the first time that you run into them, and then if you run into them again, how does the attitude, how does the demeanor change, or does it?
So, and that's one thing that's kind of, it's not, the word's not cool, but fascinating about working within a department like probation is that my first gig was in placement, juvenile placement. So you got kids that are removed from the home for various reasons. It could be that the home's not stable, the parents aren't considered suitable by the state to raise the child. They get removed, put into a group home. So being able to watch a kid, I have one guy that always sticks out in my mind in particular, from age 12, 13, he's on juvenile probation, obviously, removed from the home, watched him all the way through 18, and then I was reassigned for a while, and then I get to see him when he's 24 years old, out of prison. Very different, very hardened, very cold. You can still chop it up and talk to him, but there's a definite progression that happens in custody. And that's not just a progression as a person involved in gangs, that's a progression as someone who's in the system, for sure.
Yeah, can we talk about that a little bit? What do you see as far as people coming in and out and how they change, and why do you think that is?
Probably, I mean, and I'm not an expert by any means, just exposed to it a little bit, I guess, but I think that when you're in custody, there is a lot more stringent rules and structure. And there's certain things you can say, certain things you can do, ways that you wear your clothes, your socks got to be all the way up. You can only associate with certain folks. You're expected to do things. And detention officers can speak to this a lot better than I can, but that's the structure and the world that you live in. And the more often you go back, the more often you're reminded of that structure and those rules and what's expected of you. And then you kind of come out to chaos on the streets, which is a little bit less structure. So there are youngsters that hate it. They can't stand it. And a couple stints at juvenile hall. And then, of course, the wraparound and the resources involved afterwards through community members. And it doesn't have to be cops or probation, faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, parents, relatives. That's what really, in my mind, is the key to prevention. But without that, and you keep on going back, and more is expected of you.
Mm-hmm. There's been conversations throughout the podcast of people questioning, like Judge Tafoya specifically brought up, he has to weigh the option of whether it will do more harm than good to put somebody back into somewhere where they can't bail out because the bail is so high. What, I guess part of my question, he was talking about potential negative effects that you'd be exposed to within the system, even for juveniles. So inside, is there gangs inside, and is that giving them more exposure? Is that why they're coming out different, do you think?
I don't know if anybody can tackle the prison system,
right.
But there is, yes, I do think that that there is a definite progression. I do think that there's more expected of you, and I do think that it does have a negative impact on someone who's trying to increase their protective factors. Are you exposed to? Are there gangs that have influence within the prison system? Of course, definitely, and I mean, there's an old adage, right? No matter what, if you're going to live that life, you'll end up in here with us, where we can control you, and that's what the prison system does as far as gangs go. And there's definitely ties to the outside too. But I mean, the judge is right. If you're going to weigh community safety or a potential victim versus someone's maybe getting hardened or losing the opportunities that they otherwise would based on a crime, then yeah, that's a tough gig for sure. Does it help incarceration by itself? Not a chance. Everyone knows that. I mean, that's I'm not saying everyone. That's research shows, evidence-based practices and intervention show that hardcore supervision and incarceration without any kind of treatment can sometimes have the inverse effect, negative effect. But I mean, as a law enforcement officer, do I hate it when I see folks that I know have committed crimes or are really hurting their own families and the families are letting them to a certain extent? Do I hate to see them get released? Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the system that we live in, though. You got to try and link them with other services too.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about, I'll say specifically juveniles, just because I feel like they're the ones who can be influenced the most. Do you see them who maybe they're not associated with gangs or particularly are part of a gang, but then they go into the system, they come out and they're either a little more associated or getting pulled in? Do you see that?
On occasion, yes. I think that, I mean, and Madrigal might be able to comment on it too, but you have, on the outside, there's a little bit more of a kind of a neighborhood mentality, whereas when you go into custody, now we're looking at a larger group. So without getting into prison gangs and whatnot, but the Southerners, Northerners, and then you have your black gangs and the white gangs that kind of come under one umbrella, whites and Hispanics, blacks and Norteños, depending on the facility. So you kind of lose that neighborhood or that block mentality when you go in. That doesn't mean that it's the gang portion's replaced or gone. It's replaced by an allegiance to something that's bigger in the prison gang system. So if you are a certain race and you go in and you don't have necessarily a strong hood or neighborhood block tie, yeah, you're going to be pressured for protection and to be able to survive your time in prison, to fall under one umbrella, no matter which one that is that you fall under. Are there other ways to get through? I've heard there are, but I also heard it's very difficult. So
we'll talk about, again, juveniles specifically, because I want parents to be able to take advantage of some of this information. When they come out and they do end up on probation, or they just get put on probation directly, what are some of the things that you see is typical when they either fail, they're not successful through probation, or that they are successful? Like, what are the different factors, and how can people make sure that if they do go down this path, that we can redirect them onto a better path?
For sure. One thing that I've always, even when I was if I'm the supervising officer, I've always stressed to parents that there is no other person, no matter if the kid's on probation or not. They're afraid that they're going to get locked up by their probation officer. There's no more important person or powerful person than a parent in a home, period. And that even after a kid's placed on probation, that's the way it is, because it's your house, your rules. And there's a couple of programs out there, Parent Project, Parents on a Mission, that are awesome programs that help revisit, that structure in the home and provide single parents with the resources, skills, and a network of a kind of support. So when that's in place, if a person is asking for help, and as there's a kid on juvenile probation, if they're not getting the help that they need, then you keep on running it up. Talk to the probation officer, supervisor. But don't forget, no one replaces you as the parent, and I think that's a big part of it. He's grown. I need you to handle him. Nah, dude, that's your kid, period. And that kid will be your kid until either, hopefully, they, God willing, they move out and start a productive life themselves, or it gets to the point where they keep on reoffending, and we have to address them through the criminal justice system, which to me is a sad thing. These are a lot of these issues, like we talked about, if they hit early, would not kind of progress or escalate into what we see as far as shootings and home invasions, et cetera.
Now, the two organizations you just brought up, I've never heard of them. So is that open for anybody and everybody to talk to those organizations?
Yeah, Kern County Superintendent of Schools website has Parent Project. It's offered, well, with the COVID stuff, it's a little bit different, but it's offered all throughout Kern County. Parents on a Mission, I believe, was also through Superintendent of Schools. And then Bakersfield City School District also has a parenting academy. So these are open. Availability and whatnot is through them. It's a separate agency, sure. But it's a pretty impactful program. It's good stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. So do you think part of the issue could be that parents don't necessarily know these resources are available, or do you think they're just not taking advantage?
It could be a combination. I know that just looking from the outside in, I know that when I am either supervising a household that has a probationer in it, that single mom, 3 other kids, trying to work full time, and you're talking about going to a class in the evening, it's rough. It's rough. I understand that. So it could be a combination of things. We spend a lot of time advertising Coca-Cola. Maybe we should put Parents on a Mission or Parent Project on a billboard and push that. We spend a lot of time pushing Flamin' Hot Cheetos, and it's a societal, ranking of importance, and so.
So what are some of the signs that you do see when kids do start to redirect onto a better path? What qualities are you seeing, or what are you seeing the parents do or community do that helps get them on that better path?
I think that a big part of it is the communication between the parent and the kid. And, there is no space between a child and his kid. You want to have privacy, that's fine. But if you live in my house, I know what's going on. I make it a point to talk to your friends. Anyone can come over that wants to, but we're going to vet them, screen them. I'm going to talk to them. If you go somewhere else, I'm going to go meet the parents. So that's the difference, is that you see folks and the kid. Initially the kid is like, dude, my mom is all over me. It's crazy. I can't say. I'd rather go back to juvenile hall than have to stay here. I'm talking juveniles, but this is also 18 to 25-year-olds. Let's be honest. A man isn't a man until, in overseas they say like 30 years old, in Morocco, where my dad's from. But that degree to which the parent is involved, and then also a definite, clear pulling away from friends. So you can't do it half booty. You can't do it half in, half out. You're either all in or you're all out. You can still be you, but if you continue to associate with people that are engaged in criminal activity or in gang activity, you will get sucked back. It's hard enough to do it cutting it cold turkey, And a lot of times that happens too. It's sad. Dudes that have been out of the game for a while, there's still grudges that are held on to from before. They still want to make an example of them, blood in, blood out. And that's the most tragic, I think, is when the guys kind of turn it around for the last 2 or 3 years, and then all of a sudden, it sucks.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that too? What success stories have you seen where people, especially maybe those who are a little bit older, decide that they're done with that lifestyle and they want to move along? How do they make that transition and get out and then move forward?
Yeah, definitely. It's the mindset first. A lot of times, family it helps wake a guy up. As a father, kind of seeing the degree to which that you getting hurt is so much less than someone that you love getting hurt, like your child, and being able to be there, getting tired of getting locked up, losing your job because you're doing these things that you're engaging in criminal activity, and that ultimately it's hurting not only your woman, but or your wife or baby mama or whatever, but the kids that are your biological makeup. So that seeing that what the success stories and a lot of times I don't see them, to tell you the truth. As probation officers, the only time I see you again is when
Right.
I'm running into you on a home call or a warrant service or whatever. But the ones that we do, when I do bump into people at the grocery store, usually it's moms, right, that'll tell me, hey, what's up, sir, Mr. Baameur, what's cracking? Jimmy's doing good, and this is what's going on with him. Sometimes it's a total separation. Sometimes they're gone. Another state, another county. Sometimes it's just, kind of getting to the point where you can get comfortable with yourself and you start living that life where you're not associating yourself. You're still there, but you're not associating yourself, and hoping that people respect you enough to leave you alone.
I want to talk a little bit because that just sparked something in mind when we talked to Sergeant Nunez, is like the rapport that you build with these individuals. To a certain extent, you have a job to do, right? Mm-hmm. But you do come in, it sounds like, with some form of respect, like, hey, you do what you're supposed to do, I'll do what I'm supposed to do, everybody's good, and we move forward. How do you build that rapport to begin with?
I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that and I'm speaking on behalf of probation officers, we go to the houses over and over and over again. And I'm old, right? So I got 19 years. There's a couple dudes. I'm like, hey, what's up? You're the dad now of the kid. Mm-hmm. And I'm just there doing a lot of times it's not intentional. I'm going to go look for this guy's kid. It's not at all. It's like, hey, dude, this is your kid? Wow. So, it's that having, I guess, the opportunity and ability to work with people, not only holding them accountable, but providing them with opportunities too, it inherently builds a relationship. And also the fact that, dude, we're going to be there again. So there is no need to be disrespectful to anybody. It's counterproductive. And a lot of times finding a way to talk to people about things other than their terms and conditions of probation, identifying goals, what's important to them. You especially our officers that are in custodial settings, those juvenile correction officers do a hell of a job talking to kids about life and using every interaction that they have to help do some kind of positive redirection. Because if you only talk about all the negatives, that's what you're going to get out of it. But that's how you build a relationship. I think it's communication.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of, when you say sometimes you'll run into then all of a sudden the father of a son that now maybe you're working with the son, seeing repeat offenders, what is that like for you? And then also that sounds a little bit, not that it's always true, generational. Can you kind of talk about both of those and then how you deal with it and approach it?
Yeah, I think that, and Joe can probably speak to it too. I feel bad because I'm hogging this.
You're good,
man.
I'm just eye candy.
You are, huh? You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
I think that, yeah, you'll hear a last name in a certain area, and we don't get calls for service like the PD does, but we'll get information, or I'll get someone assigned to one of my guys' caseload that works gang specifically, and I'm like, oh, here we go. This is what we got, and that's something that we need to get over, because that kind of stereotype or that name association isn't always right. That being said, we kind of have a system that we have set up where even if I'm dealing with somebody who continues to repeat and violate terms and conditions of probation, let's say that they abscond one time, the next time they come back, it's supposed to be a clean slate. Okay, so we don't increase the amount of time that we're recommending. It's the same issue. Let's try and tackle and solve that problem that they're having. I think that you do the same thing with folks that are repeat offenders. So I'm not saying let people get away with stuff. We'll hold you accountable. And we go through the court to do that, and use graduated sanctions, GPS, whatever we need to do. But if you just keep holding on to that bias that where I'm like, dude, this guy's going to screw up no matter what, then you know what? A lot of times you're going to be right, but you're also going to have a pretty crappy relationship with that person because you're treating them like a lot of other people have and people do. If you want to bet, you want to make money, go to Vegas. But if you want to bet on people, then you're gonna draw even, man. And at the end of the day, you're going to be like, it's easy to say this guy's going to screw up. It's super easy because statistically, you're probably right. What is it? 8% of the population commits 88% of the crime. So if I'm going to bet that this guy's going to do something else, yeah, that's easy money. But we don't need that, you know?
Yeah, that's a good question to ask you though too. When you do see those repeat, and he brought up specifically like a call with a last name that it's an area you go to a lot, and that last name is associated with maybe a house. How do you guys approach that when you're going to calls for service?
We definitely, if it's somebody that we constantly are in contact with, sometimes prior we actually call you guys. Hey, we're going to so and so. Oh yeah, and sometimes they're like, oh well, hold up, let me go with you. Yeah, wait for us. We'll go with you. But yeah, we definitely, depending on the crime, there's cautions that you have to take when you approach a house, especially if it's somebody who has a violent past. But if it's somebody that is just caught in the system, that maybe potentially be on the fence, he's here, but we want to bring him all the way back over. You definitely do proceed with trying to build that rapport that we talked about earlier. How do we get him back? And we do explain to him like, okay, this is the stuff that's available to you. Are you willing to do that? Sometimes they'll say yeah, which is cool, but sometimes they don't follow up on the information that we give them. So the fact that they're saying yes and not following up, I mean, I think it's a step forward, but it's just getting the resources, and we'll actually contact them. Hey, this guy needs, says he wants help, he wants out. And, then they jump on it and proceed with whatever they do.
Mm-hmm.
And just Ahmed and I, we've, how long have we been on the streets together? We've known each other for quite a long time. So we've been to these places out there together. So we know the same people, even though they're based out of Bakersfield. Like, we know the same people. We come in contact with the same people. And if there's ever, we do need information, we call them, and they're like right off the top of their head. Hey, what do you know on this guy? Oh, okay, let's go. Let's do it.
Okay, so I have two questions on that, and either one of you can answer. How does a police department and probation, how do you guys work together? What is that relationship like?
I think it's been great. It's I have zero complaints. If we need anything, we call them. So what Kern County has, they have kind of what's called the street interdiction team, where we have where multiple agencies get together, and primarily we're always like, okay, probation's on it. Like, we need probation there, and then we get other departments such as Bakersfield PD, McFarland PD, Shafter, all the Kern County area. So we go into a certain city, or if it's a county, we go into county areas, and we all work together. We meet up in somewhere. We come up with the game plan. We have names of people who are on probation, and we go check their residence. And if there's some people with warrants, then they get arrested. So, and also, like, we involve them in everything that we do. Like, let's just say it's not a street interdiction team event, and it's something related to one of our cases. We definitely let them know, hey, this guy's a suspect in a 211 or a homicide. What information can you give us? And they're able to tell us who mom is, where they're staying, a couple places where they may be staying. So I think the relationship is close. So yeah, I don't know if you want to
Yeah, no.
add to it.
I don't think there's a single agency within the county, state, federal, or local. It could be a county agency or a local jurisdiction that probation department doesn't work with on a daily basis. So it's definitely, where information sharing, but also sometimes we'll help, take someone into custody that if it was maybe conducted in a different manner, the outcome might be a little bit more, volatile. So, so we've called people into the office before that are wanted for murder. And they'll come to the office. So,
and one thing that
if you're a probationer wanted for murder, don't listen to that. But just come into the office.
Right.
But that's what I was going to touch on, is that there's one thing that I do notice a lot, is that you guys get more information than we do. They're more, they talk to you guys more than they talk to us. So if we're trying to get information on something, we're like, no, we're not talking. Or they're like, we're not going to talk to you. But then we call you guys and hey, we're looking into this guy. And you're like, oh yeah, well he just told me this, and I was like, oh okay. So I know they talk to you guys better than they talk to us. So I think that's another great thing about them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
He also mentioned that sometimes you'll call probation and you guys will just have the information off the top of your head. I want to know how that process works. Is it just spent over time? Because I remember when you were talking about getting into the gang unit and supervising the gang unit, that you really did like a full deep dive history to learn more about it, and then you start studying individuals. Is it like a study system, or is it just because of the time that you've spent with these individuals that you're able to have more of this knowledge?
It depends. Each officer should have a pretty good idea of the probationer. Now, don't get me wrong. Our caseload sizes are crazy.
Sure.
Everybody has budgetary woes, et cetera. But when you work a specialized caseload, it's our hope that you know as much about that person for information sharing, for being able to find them. I mean, how am I going to know whether or not you're doing well unless I find you? How do I get a raw, visceral view of what you're doing unless I know your real address, which is plenty of people that give shell addresses out there. It's a game that's played, and usually not by the people that are ready to turn their life around. Mm-hmm. But you would hope that each person, that we kind of get a background of who they are, what they're about, their associates, the family structure, et cetera, because that helps you identify what's important to them. Identifying what's important to them helps you establish goals that are realistic and objectives that are realistic. So yeah, it is. I mean, the rapport that's built is to tailor a case plan for that person. But you also, I'm going to the house. I'm running into people that they hang out with, meeting their second brother who we had no idea that was the same, different last name, same household, same brothers. And I think that spending that time and hopefully seeing someone in their house once a month, you learn a lot about them. But then you also learn a lot about that particular gang area, that neighborhood, their associates. You see the tagging every day, just like somebody on patrol. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we look for that. We look for the higher score offender unit has 5 officers that are dedicated to gang witness expert testimony for the court and working with gang members and holding them accountable, new law violations, treatment, whatever. We also have a group that handles the sex offenders, 290. So we have 3 officers doing that. So each officer kind of plays a different function, but information gathering and really getting a sense of what's important to each of those people and what risks they pose to the community and how we can help them, and reduce recidivism, that all goes into it. Sorry if I rambled on that one.
No, yeah. When you're seeing people who do get out, right? Maybe they make somewhat of a clean break, they're getting on the straight and narrow. Do they ever get drawn back in? And if so, do you see factors that are contributing to that? Mm-hmm. And what are those factors?
Definitely. I mean, if you look at any kind of something that damages protective factors, that's one way that you're going to return to associating with the folks that you did in the past and engaging in activities that you did in the past. So if somebody gets, maybe I've done a good job cutting ties with pro-criminal associates, but my substance abuse issue is creeping back in. Now I'm going back to the same group of people that I got high with. That same group of people that I got high with happen to be associated with a specific hood or a gang or whatever, or engaged in other criminal activity. So when you have kind of those acute needs that pop up, substance abuse, housing, let's say you go through a grave or a nasty breakup, a domestic violence issue, whatever, then yeah, that's an indicator that you could be reverting back to, your previous associates. And it kind of sounds lame when I'm saying it like that, because you don't turn off a switch and turn on a switch as far as active participation in a criminal street gang. Mm-hmm. You can't do that.
Right.
So that's when you see it go down and go all bad. When you see people that are resilient and able to build their protective factors, it's like I said, all in or all out, and you're cutting that off. But yeah, people get dragged back in all the time.
Mm-hmm. Is there any way that the community or family can help prevent that? If somebody has decided they want to start going that way, but you see them starting to get sucked back into it, is there anything we can do to help prevent that from happening?
I think that a lot of those, the community-based organizations out there, particularly Wendell Davis Foundation, Stay Focused Ministries, I'm not here selling their product, but I've seen them do outreach. I know that they do the kind of the mentoring, the one-on-one mentoring, Garden Pathways. That's the kind of thing that can help. Just like a sponsor in NA, You know, the sponsor is the one that knows they've walked that walk. They can see when somebody's slipping up. They can help provide that intervention. Family, same thing. You know, I love you, but your friends can't come over here, period. I don't want those dudes around me. I don't want them around my grandkids. I don't want them. So if you're going to make that decision, you make that decision. But that we're not going to half step it. We're not going to be okay sometimes and not okay the others, because it happens like that. So, and if you have certain people at your house is going to get targeted. So, not trying to go off topic there, but I think that's one of the differences is all in or all out. Mm-hmm. And as a family member, that's what I do. I put down my foot. Love them. I love you, but you're not going to do that. And those people aren't going to be here when you're living in my house. And then combine that with kind of the community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, you know?
Yeah. On a personal level, I've asked several people this that we've interviewed. How do you deal with all of the things that you deal with on a daily basis and not take it home or not become hardened? What do you do to kind of process that or to separate it?
I mean, everyone compartmentalizes, but I have a great family, you know? So I got a great wife and love my woman and 5 awesome kids, and you know, I got my folks and mother-in-law that are all good people. So that part of it's easy. And then, I mean, we probably have ways that we deal with it that aren't appropriate. Like we would joke, if you don't laugh, you'll cry, dude. So on a lot of stuff. But I also think that if you kind of, you know, look at people for what they are, there's not many differences between us. There's some bad decision making. You know, there's some cold dudes out there. Don't get me wrong. There's guys that I like almost everybody. There's guys that I really don't like because of the degree to which they have no empathy for other people, you know, and they're cruel and sadistic. There's dudes like that. But they're very few. Mm-hmm. A lot of kids are just do some stupid stuff and they're afraid, you know, and fear drives people to kind of find other folks that are like-minded and create their own little group that they can protect themselves. It's kind of cowardice. You would hope that people would do more sticking up for innocent folks or people that can't defend themselves. So, but yeah, it's just living life. I still like teenagers, dude. Mm-hmm. That's kind of crazy, huh? You know, not just my teenagers in my house. I can go, you know, I coach some kids. I can go to school, and at first, you know, teenagers, they get to you, man. But I think that's the gauge is when I stop liking teenagers, I got to find a different job. You know, not all of them, but I still they crack me up, man. Kids are funny as heck.
Mm-hmm. So you said you have 5 kids. So what specifically in parenting or how do you approach your children because of the job that you're in? How do you approach your children and what do you do that you think other parents may benefit from hearing about?
Sure. Everyone's circumstances are different. So I'm not a parenting guru, but it starts with your woman. My wife she still talks to each of our kids every night. Without my wife, it'd be a different story. You know, who knows? We'd all be screwed up. So, taking time to really communicate with our kids, I think, is something that's huge. And then also, like I said, we call them spot checks. If you're going somewhere, don't be surprised if you don't see me cruising by and checking it out. So that parent project, I helped facilitate it when I was a younger PO. I learned more from that than I think some of the parents in the room did by teaching that class. I took that stuff home and I used it. And, you know, my wife was always like, we don't need that to be a good parent. You know, she's right. She doesn't need it, but I needed it. It helped me out. But, I mean, growing up is hard enough as it is. You need to be, as a parent, you need to be on top of what's going on. And if your gut tells you that something's not right, follow up, you know. If I'm telling my kid, you're not going to hang out with this guy, what's the alternative? Church, sports, you know, a positive mentoring, a positive relationship. If you don't have a father, finding some kind of outlet. I'm not saying shack up with every dude, right? Because that's a problem too, and I'm not trying to sound insensitive, and that goes for men and women. Mm-hmm. When we start worrying more about ourselves than we do worry about our kids, then that's when evil kind of penetrates the household. And that's gangs, drugs, everything else that we're facing as a community.
So how do you, in your years of experience, think that we could break the cycle to get people out, right, to stop that gang violence from happening?
I think that really I guess investing as a community. It doesn't necessarily have to be monetarily. That always helps, but it's investing as a community into early intervention and prevention, and helping identify groups and subsets, not just by race and socioeconomic status, but maybe by intergenerational issues, maybe by using some kind of assessment tool to help identify kids that are at higher future risk for either delinquency or getting wrapped up into street gangs, and providing that support to the parents before it becomes an issue. So there's ways to do it. The folks in the ivory towers got it all figured out. We just got to put the resources towards it. And I think that's really the key. And then also owning this as a group and as a community. Gang violence doesn't just affect people that live, on the road over on MLK or up on the hill or in Heroin Heights. It affects everybody, because your kids go to school with other kids. They could be at a park, they could be somewhere, and it could happen to anybody. So don't pretend like you can live, somewhere else and not be affected by it. So own it as a community. That's all. That's what I think that would be a great start. Yeah.
I have one more other question that just dawned on me. If somebody's child ends up, making a bad decision, ends up on probation, what would you say to them if they really just think, oh no, my kid is just ruined? Is that something that is logical or not, and why?
Yeah, no, you bought and paid for, dude. You can't return this item to the grocery store. You can't lean on anyone else to fix your kid. Kids make mistakes. All kids do. I mean, if you look at substance abuse, there's a reason that there's relapses, and there's a reason that you create plans for relapse. Same thing happens with kids. And it could mean, we call them felony and misdemeanor offenses. You do something that really hurts somebody else, or puts your life in danger, is very self-destructive behavior. That could be a felony offense at home. That we gotta react to that, do an intervention, find out the cause, and make sure it doesn't happen again. But if it's smaller misdemeanor stuff, it's not the end of the world. That's your kid. Own it and find out what you can do to get help. And if I'm looking for marital advice, I don't go to a gigolo, right? If I'm looking for advice on how to raise my kid, I don't go to a dude that has no business raising my kid, or someone on the block, or someone that maybe continues to live that life, or engage in criminal activities. I'm not going to go to them. I might go to a faith-based, community-based organization, ask for help through whatever resource. Even the probation department or juvenile programs unit have program specialists that do groups with kids. So don't give up, never surrender. That's it.
I have one last question for you.
Yes, sir.
So the last couple of months I've been on patrol, and it feels like the complaints that we come in are usually from parents who kids are on probation. And part of their issue is that they feel that police officers don't have the right to check their kid if they're on probation. That's only by the probation department. What would you say to the parents that think that?
So believe it or not, we get the same kind of response from a parolee that says, you can't do a parole check at our house because you're not my parole agent. Or people that are on probation to a certain officer, you're not my PO, why are you here? Any juvenile, any adult who's on probation or parole can be searched. Their person, their property, their vehicle can be searched without a warrant at any time. That can be the middle of the night too. We usually don't conduct business, at extreme hours, but in extreme cases, we definitely would. So if you're on probation, if you're on parole, even if you're on court probation, don't put yourself in a situation where you could be obstructing an officer. If an officer is there to do a probation search or a probation check, it's for the right reason. It's for a good reason. If you got nothing to hide, you got nothing to hide. And if you do, then maybe it's time to start making some different life choices. So,
all right. Well, thanks. Yeah, I just kind of needed that for educational purposes. All right. This will do it for episode 7. Special thank you to our producer, Benjamin Olivar, our behind-the-scenes guy, Rafael Silva, our guest for today, Mr. Ahmed Baameur, your host, Jessica Harrington, and I'm Corporal Madrigal. We'll see you next week for episode 8, where we'll have Chief Navarez as our guest.